Welcome to our Social Topics podcast, where we examine how environmental decisions ripple through our communities. Today, we are diving into an event that shook a small California town earlier this year, the Moss Landing Battery Plant fire of January 2025. This disaster forced evacuations in the small coastal town in California County, polluted air and water, and raised urgent questions about the safety of large-scale lithium-ion energy storage. On paper, Moss Landing represented the future, one of the largest lithium-ion battery facilities in the world, built to help California store clean, renewable power. But the reality was far more complicated. When the batteries ignited, they didn't just burn, they released toxic smoke, contaminated runoff, and potentially created long-term health effects for residents and ecosystems. In this podcast, our group will break down the incident, the evidence, the environmental justice concerns, and why communities across California, including Watsonville, are pushing back against new battery installations. Let's start with the basics of what happened and what made this fire so dangerous.
On January 16, 2025, the Vistra Energy facility in Moss Landing burst into flames. This wasn't a small fire either. The flames reached towards the sky and burned so intensely that firefighters couldn't put them out with water due to the chemical hazards. Instead, the blaze had to burn itself down, a process that took days. And because lithium-ion batteries can hold energy even after appearing dead, the site reignited in flames a month later on February 18th. To make matters worse, this wasn't even the first time Moss Landing had issues. Similar battery fires had happened in 2021 and 2022. This is a pattern that raises a pretty crucial question. If this is the technology we're supposed to trust as part of the clean energy future, why does it keep causing fires with potential ecological and health effects for the nearby community? To understand, we need to look at the science behind these fires and what actually makes them so dangerous.
Lithium-ion batteries are widely used in phones, electric vehicles, and laptops. But when you're storing them by the tens of thousands in one facility, the risks do multiply. These batteries can ignite from physical damage, contamination, overheating, or even internal failure. When they catch fire, something called a thermal runaway happens. In basic terms, this means the battery creates its own oxygen, feeding the flames and making the fire burn hotter and more intensely. That's why water couldn't put out the Moss Landing fire. And because the batteries keep heating themselves, the fire spreads rapidly and can ignite even after it seems to be extinguished. But the chemical dangers are far from worse. Fires like this release toxic gases, microscopic particles like PM 2.5, and heavy metals such as cobalt and nickel. The thick smoke containing these chemicals can drift for miles, and these pollutants can cause long-term respiratory, neurological, and cardiovascular problems. So when companies propose putting these facilities near homes, farms, schools, and coastal ecosystems, the risks aren't hypothetical. Moss Landing shows exactly what could go wrong when a fire like this breaks out.
Although originally inhabited by the Ohlone people, Moss Landing is named after Charles Moss, a retired ship captain who moved to the area in 1866. Realizing the potential of the location, Charles Moss constructed a 200-foot wharf to establish shipping facilities and a pier for commercial water traffic. However, its location is what makes Moss Landing especially vulnerable. The facility sits right at the edge of Elkhorn Slough, one of California's most ecologically rich wetlands. It's home to otters, migratory birds, fish species, and fragile marine ecosystems that rely on clean air and water. When the fire burned, smoke and chemical particles drifted straight towards these habitats, and runoff from the firefight, which was contaminated with lithium, heavy metals, and unknown chemical byproducts, entered drainage systems that feed into the slough. Despite this, Vistra Energy minimized the severity of the environmental impacts, but scientists and community members pushed back, arguing that without transparent data and long-term tracking, we still do not know how deeply these pollutants may have reached into the ecosystem. This wasn't just a technological failure, it was an environmental governance failure.
Now, when the Watsonville proposal came forward, the company insisted that the new facility would, quote unquote, meet all local and state requirements, but that didn't reassure people. Now, Max Christian, one of the project leaders, even admitted publicly that the Moss Landing facility would not have been approved under today's fire safety guidelines. He argues that the new site would use a different battery chemistry, supposedly safer, but for many residents, that raised another question. If technology keeps evolving because past designs were unsafe, why are we all still placing experimental energy systems so close to communities? This is where the issue intersects with environmental racism. These facilities often end up in working class, Latino, or low income areas, communities that already face disproportionate pollution and fewer political protections. Now, as far as my interviews, I ended up interviewing two people. I interviewed this gentleman named Josh Contreras. He's actually a local boat owner in the Moss Landing area. Something he was concerned about was these battery packs, these lithium-ion batteries being in like a busy community like Moss Landing. So he was proposing that maybe they should go to like more rural areas, further away from where people live, where people's homes are, and then another person I ended up interviewing. So yeah, another person I ended up interviewing was her name is Marilyn Vieira. She's actually the chief of staff, and she's the assistant to the Monterey County supervisor, Glenn Church. She was mainly talking about. I first started off the interview by asking about how long she's actually been living in the area. She said she was born and raised there. And then she actually was at the Castroville office when it started, and her home was actually right behind the power plant, right behind the lithium-ion batteries. So she said her whole area was affected by the smoke. It was reported that anytime between like 3 or 4 o'clock, that's when the fire actually started, and then first responders, firefighters. They were all within the area very quickly, but she said it actually took like 2 to 3 days for the fire to burn out because there's nothing, there's not a whole lot you could really do when it comes to lithium-ion batteries catching on fire. You can't put water on it. You can't really do much, so they really had to let it burn out. And then she said that actually back in 2022, there was a PG&E and Tesla battery incident that happened previously to this fire. And so once that happened, I think a lot of people within the area already knew how to respond to this crisis. And then she also mentioned that there is going to be a very big environmental impact. So they're going to be testing, I guess the EPA and Vistra will be testing, they'll have air monitoring equipment to actually monitor the air for at least a decade within this area. So, and I will move it on, or I'll pass it on to Isaiah.
Okay, and yeah, this brings us to a larger and not larger, but to another important point, and it's that clean energy doesn't automatically equal safe energy. Moss Landing was supposed to symbolize California's green future, but instead it exposed exposed flaws we have in environmental oversight. And it's true that the numbers of accidents have decreased as the number of lithium battery storages have increased. But this highlights how older facilities must be constantly upgraded and evaluated. It's a reminder that safety protocols have to be in top shape, and we must hold those responsible for accidents like these accountable because of the harm and unique dangers that they can cause. And despite its clean energy branding, the facility introduced new kinds of air and water pollution. There was toxic smoke, contaminated runoff, and fine particles like PM 2.5 that can enter the bloodstream. Also hydrogen fluoride, which in even small amounts can cause serious health effects like lifelong respiratory issues. These aren't just harmless byproducts, they're pollutants that pose real health risks to real people. And the lack of transparent reporting after the fires has only deepened distrust. Many community members questioned whether companies and regulators were prioritizing energy production over public health. And without long-term monitoring, it's impossible to know the full ecological impact. This is why many residents and researchers argue strongly against building more of these facilities until they are enforceable, uh, until there are enforceable safety standards and honest transparency. And next, I'll be passing it on to Kathryn.
Thank you, Isaiah. What happened afterward is just as important. At first, officials framed the fire as a technical malfunction, not a public health emergency. But residents disagreed. They showed up at county meetings, organized online, contacted environmental justice groups, and demanded accountability. This local activism helped push forward Senate Bill 1227, passed in 2025. The law strengthened fire suppression requirements for battery sites and required better coordination between energy companies and first responders. It was a step, but for many, it still wasn't enough. Because the fundamental problem still remains. Why should communities living near sensitive ecosystems shoulder the risks of large-scale lithium battery storage? Shouldn't the green energy transition protect people, not put them in harm's way? And that brings us to the personal stories of those directly affected. Here is Brian Roeder, co-founder of Never Again Moss Landing, a local activist group that is dedicated to bringing attention to the threat that lithium batteries pose in communities, working to ensure that the destruction that occurred in Moss Landing does not occur again.
We've demonstrated against our state senator, John Laird, because he chose to walk away from the community. He's done some performative stuff in response. He's got a bill that doesn't really do much, doesn't have much in the way of teeth. He disagree, but he knows better. So we were just people that found each other in the dark. And fortunately, there's a commitment that's shared, and there's an ongoing desire to try and find a solution and right or wrong. And there's a battle to us. There's a willingness to fight for what's right instead of accept what's happened. And what's been really fascinating about this in some ways, I mean, I expected that the company Vistra would do all they could to try and, gloss over this and get us all to move on. I expected that. I mean, they're in the profit business, right? They're a giant utility. They're the biggest utility polluter in the country. Their accountants figure out that, the risks and the losses and the wins. And at the end of the day, it's about market share. I understand that, right? That's the nature of the business. We're in a capitalist society. What I didn't expect is that our elected officials, almost all of them, would just basically turn their backs on this. The commitment to carbon neutral 2045 is enormous. I share the commitment to that. But at the same time, as I told our state senator, I said, we're watching. We need to see you take care of this community. If you don't take care of this community, how can we trust you when you tell us we can trust the tech? And he hasn't. Both he and the governor made a choice to not engage on what happened to this community and to just move on. And it's a type of study blindness, in my opinion. It's tied into the idea that the overarching goal of carbon neutral is so important that there, as John Laird himself said, some eggs are going to get broken. Well, where are the eggs? And I think that it's possible to do both at the same time. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can both say that, we have got to get there, but we have to do better. And instead, the effort is we're going to get there and nothing's going to stop us. And in doing that, we're creating enormous risks for our state, in my opinion, because there probably won't be another Moss Landing because that was unique. It was a huge number of these batteries packed close together inside a giant building. The industry itself acknowledges that was a huge mistake and it'll never happen again. But what we're doing is we're putting these big containers, these shipping containers, these specialized containers into neighborhoods next to our parents' homes, next to our schools, next to our hospitals. And what we're doing is we're flipping the switch on them so they can collect the power off our rooftops during the day that we're generating and then sell it back to us at a very high cost at night. Economically and in terms of decarbonization, it makes sense. The problem is that one of them pops, as I say. When that happens, it's going to mess up the neighborhood. It's going to mess up your family. It's going to mess up the school you went to school at, and it is happening. These things are happening now. People are saying they're safe. It's not going to happen. They said the same thing about Moss Landing, of course, right? So the risks are there. They're very real. We know what happens when they burn. Incredibly toxic crap comes out of them. So, and most people don't understand the risks that are being taken in their neighborhoods, with their livelihoods, with their properties. And that's the problem. What's the difference if you have one giant one that burns and you have 1,000 that are at risk of, they won't all burn, but you still have 1,000 of them installed all over the state, and some of them burn, right? So there's a lot of problems with this technology. It's not fail safe, and the risks are enormous. So
The Moss Landing battery fire revealed something we don't talk about enough. The clean energy transition has environmental and human health risks of its own. Lithium-ion batteries are powerful, but when they fail, the consequences fall hardest on vulnerable communities and delicate ecosystems. Our takeaway isn't that clean energy is bad, but that equity, transparency, and safety must be part of the conversation. If California wants to lead the way, it can't allow toxic facilities to keep landing in towns that don't have the political or economic power to fight back. Until we have safer battery technology and stronger regulations, building more massive lithium-ion storage plants, especially in populated or ecologically sensitive areas, simply isn't worth the risk. Thank you for listening, and thank you to everyone in our group who contributed research, insight, and analysis. This podcast is brought to you by our team: Alycea Brown, Bryce Nielsen, Hope Duarte Raya, Isaiah Perez, Jazmine Casanita, Kathryn Bitter, Paulina Ortero, and Sydney Yeager. Thank you.